Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's online discussion. My name is Zienab Fahs, Director of Safe Spaces at CAIR Michigan, and welcome. This evening we'll be discussing 20 years after 9/11, where do we go from here? We're going to be talking a little bit about the effects of 9/11 that they've had on American Muslims, those perceived to be Muslim, Muslim Americans, etc. So inshallah, you all benefit from this conversation tonight. With me, I have Executive Director Dawud Walid and Staff Attorney Amy Doukoure. And Brother Dawud is going to get us started, inshallah. Some beginning remarks, and then talking to us a little bit about the specific foreign domestic policies, sort of the shift and the effects that American Muslims saw post 9/11 in their everyday lives. So please, Brother Dawud.
Ladies and gentlemen who are watching right now live, brothers and sisters, peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sallam. First of all, on this very sober occasion, let me extend my condolences on behalf of the Michigan chapter of CAIR to anyone who is watching this right now live or in its entirety who lost a family member, loved one, or friend on 9/11 20 years ago, on that very tragic day in which 3,000 human souls, Americans and also people of other nationalities, Christians, Jewish people, Muslims, people of other faiths and no faiths at all, tragically lost their lives. So we extend our condolences to all of you who are watching, and we pray to Almighty God that you are bestowed with divine healing for your terrible loss. We also would like to say to the community before we start that anytime that 9/11 rolls around, we urge the community to be a little bit more vigilant in regards to personal safety as well as security. And in this 20th anniversary of 9/11, there are going to be some people's emotions who are going to be running high. This weekend, we do have people who are angry. There are people who have some sort of trauma behind the event, be they people who are directly affected or even some of our service members who have been inflicted with PTSD, who haven't gotten the proper help and support that they need from our government and our broken health system that does not give mental health as it should to Americans in general, but especially our veterans. Keeping all of that in mind, we encourage all of you to be a little more careful about your security tomorrow, especially those individuals who are outwardly looking Muslim, or even those people who are not Muslim but can be confused to be Muslim. As we know that the first victim of a hate attack after 9/11 20 years ago, a homicide, was actually a Sikh American. It wasn't even a Muslim, but who was attacked. And we know of other attacks and bigotry has happened to Christian Arabs as well as other Sikh Americans, the most infamous being the massacre that took place at the Gurdwara in Wisconsin years ago regarding that heinous attack. So please be vigilant and careful about your safety. And now in regards to 9/11, and I'll be very brief because there's really too many policies to talk about and outline that were introduced after the tragedy of 9/11. We know that shortly after 9/11, there was bipartisan support for the Patriot Act. And many of these policies, by the way, that have affected our community negatively are bipartisan in nature. And I'm saying that because in some media stories, there's been a little bit extra focus on the effects of anti-Muslim bigotry and former President Donald Trump and the right wing, especially the rise of hate crimes that took place when he was running for office, and then the first time, and then directly after he got he got elected and then sworn in, there was a rise in hate crimes against non-white people and religious minorities in general, including Muslims. But I don't want to make this a discussion that is simply about the conservatives, because there's bipartisan support for most of the bad public policy that has stripped away our civil liberties. And in some cases, some bad public policy that was introduced actually by Democrats and signed into law by or engineered by America's first Black president who has Muslim lineage, which is Barack Hussein Obama. So I want to be clear about that. But shortly after 9/11, when the emotions were running high, we had the Patriot Act that was signed into law, and there's different iterations. That, for the most part, is probably one of the biggest, undermining of privacy rights in the history of my lifetime. Myself being born in the 70s, but probably one of the biggest infringements on privacy rights. And of course, we know that even though many of these policies that are written, they are quote unquote colorblind or religious blind, but we know that there was thought that was done behind these policies, and we know that Muslims suffered more impact than other demographics within the American society. So we had the Patriot Act, which opened up the door for the United States government to be able to look into our emails, to even be able to understand or find out what books that we are checking out. This sorts of activities, as far as mass surveillance by the United States government and the Patriot Act, then end up opening up the doors to specific watch lists that have disproportionately affected American Muslims. And as a matter of fact, the Michigan chapter of CAIR is the first Muslim organization to actually challenge these watch lists in federal court. Led to which started under the Bush administration, the Patriot Act, but also these watch lists, in which there are two, the no-fly list, and then also what some would call the suspected terrorist watch list, in which quadruple S status or 4 S's are put on people's boarding passes, leading, in the first case, leading to Muslims not being able to fly, and even some cases of what we would call extrajudicial exile, in which American Muslims were overseas studying or on vacation, put on watch lists, and then not even being able to fly back home, which then there had to be legal action taken just to get people to have the opportunity to fly back home, though not being removed as of yet, some of these individuals from these no-fly list. Then we have the other list, in which American citizens have been harassed, and particularly flying not only domestically but internationally, as well as international border reentry over land borders, or coming across borders, such as driving back from Canada into the state of Michigan, maybe via the Sarnia Bridge, the Ambassador Bridge here in Detroit, or the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel. Muslims being pulled aside, searched, and asked invasive questions about First Amendment protected activities, such as, do you pray? How many times a day do you pray? Are you Sunni? Are you Shia? What scholar do you follow? Do you pray the dawn prayer in the mosque? Right? So this is basically treating First Amendment protected beliefs and practices as a type of predicate for a national security threat, which of course is unconstitutional. This was opened up with the Patriot Act and then the no watch list. I mean, or the two watch lists. We also have the undermining of the FISA court, which basically gave the NSA carte blanche to spy on Muslims, but Americans in general regarding international communications, including phone calls. So we found out actually through WikiLeaks, through Eric Snowden, that actually our national executive director, Dawud, was actually one of those Americans who was being spied on without warrants by the NSA. And there's no doubt that I was spied on at least as well, because during this time period, I was regularly talking with him on the phone and meeting up with him or an email. So I'm sure that some of my communications were intercepted by the NSA. But this is also proof. I'd like to let you know that CAIR is a squeaky clean organization in regards to some of what the Islamophobes have claimed about CAIR as a national organization and us having some sort of ties to extremist groups. Because if there was even a shred of evidence against us, we would have been indicted, because we know that we are blankly spied upon, right? So this is just a reality. There's been other things that have been challenging. I'll leave off with another one that's also impacted our community, specifically in Michigan. And by the way, regarding those watch lists, Dearborn, Michigan, per capita, has more people on the watch list than any other city in the United States of America. New York is number 2. So New York has the most when we're talking about per capita. And that's, of course, the city of Dearborn has a high concentration of American Muslims. Second to Hamtramck, Michigan, which is in Metro Detroit, that has the highest concentration of Muslims in the United States of America. And of course, most of those Muslims come from national origins of Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq, which those individuals make up a large percentage of those who are on the watch list, at least here in Dearborn, Michigan. We also were talking about Dearborn, but in general, something put in by the Obama administration called CVE, the Countering Violent Extremism Program, that seems innocuous on the face, but basically it was a type of program put in that was basically treating the Muslim community again as some sort of suspect or potentially dangerous community, trying to de facto deputize members in the Muslim community to basically spy on their own brothers and sisters, in which grant monies were given to certain organizations. The Dearborn Police Department was the only police department actually in the state of Michigan, the only local police department in the state of Michigan to actually have gotten CVE funds. Now, when Trump came into office, at least with his rhetoric, and when he talked about CVE, at least he pulled the facade from the Obama administration, right? Because the Obama administration said that they were just, they were looking at all forms of extremism, though they were not targeting or infiltrating evangelical churches. They weren't, targeting white groups. They were using informants and agent provocateurs to infiltrate masajid, including Masjid Haq in Detroit, which led to the tragic and fatal shooting of Imam Luqman, who was killed 11 years ago by the FBI, in which he was shot 20 times, including in the back and in the groin by the FBI. That was a real high-profile case that we dealt with as an organization. But Trump just said, you know what? I mean, we're just looking at Muslims. We're not going to look at white folks or white supremacists. So at least, in a sense, one of the good things about Trump, at least he ended the facade of like how the federal government and law enforcement operates in terms of who they actually target, and not to mention his executive orders for the Muslim travel ban and other things that Trump did, where he just, ended the facade. The Obama administration had instituted certain procedures and certain things that were targeting Muslims abroad and coming from certain countries as well. But Trump was just more flagrant in his anti-Muslim bigotry. But I think I will end with that. As far as from a national policy perspective. Of course, we have the ongoing challenge across the country, as well as in Michigan, of discriminatory practices on even at the local level of zoning boards and planning commissions who have blocked zoning for the construction of new mosques or new Islamic schools or expansion projects. And it's almost a type of playbook that they've had. We've dealt with this issue. I just talked about the day in Khutbat al-Jummah. I remember in Hazel Park, they blocked initially the establishment of the Islamic Organization of North America. To this day, there is still not a mosque in Hazel Park, Michigan. Campaigns against them, campaigns against the ICA in Farmington Hills, the Syrian community, campaigns against Iona, campaigns against the American Muslim Diversity Association in the beginning, and in Sterling Heights, Pittsfield Township. I mean, the list goes on of the amount of problems that we've had from zoning boards and local municipalities that have also been engaged in the targeting and marginalization of Muslims. But again, I want to focus more on the national security angle, though there's a trickle-down effect of national policies, starting with the Bush administration, that trickled down to state government, state law enforcement, like the fusion centers, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, even the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, which didn't exist until after 9/11, working with these task force and so-called fusion centers here in the state of Michigan, to local police departments, to the Detroit Police Department, the Dearborn Police Department, to local zoning boards that have been involved in institutional Islamophobia, not just one-offs. With that, I think I will stop for now, so that we can continue with the discussion.
Thank you. So Brother Dawud just shared with us really on paper what changed for American Muslims or Muslims living in America, policies, national security, etc. So Sister Amy, can you share with us now, to sort of bring it in on a Michigan level or local level, what cases have been reported to our office, and what have we really seen, or what can we talk on based on what our office has seen, maybe around the watch list, FBI harassment, some of the things that Brother Dawud touched on.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you, Brother Dawud, for giving such a broad and great understanding of the policies that were put in place, because after 9/11, there were a lot of policies that were put in place with the intent of surveilling Muslims and watching our communities and mapping out our communities at a law enforcement level. And it's something, people might think that it's been 20 years since 9/11 and we're past a lot of the harm that those policies have caused, but I can guarantee you that we are still at CAIR Michigan seeing on a regular basis the impact of those broad surveillance policies. We are still getting calls every week about individuals who've had difficulty traveling domestically and internationally. We have clients who are infants who cannot get on an airplane because they're on the watch list. We have active clients right now who are minors who have been on the watch list since they were 11 years old. So these are real problems that are still facing our community 20 years after they were put in place. They have real impact. And actually in the last 3 years, we've seen a significant increase in the amount of people who are having travel difficulties. And also not just an escalation in the amount of people that are having travel difficulties, but an escalation in the types of difficulties that they're having at the airport. We've had a large number of people who've had electronic seizures at the border over the last 2 years. And it's growing and it's increasing every month. We get more and more calls with somebody who came back and had their cell phone or their laptop or all of their electronic devices seized at the border. And the CBP is very brazen. They're no longer claiming that it's a law enforcement investigation. They're actually saying that they're scanning their media. And what does that mean? That means they're taking the phones of Muslims to look and see what types of activities we're engaging in on the internet. What are we watching on YouTube? Who are we connected with, and what are we doing on Facebook and Instagram? Who are we communicating with in private messages on Instagram? What types of pages are we following? Things like that. So they're taking our devices and to scan them for media without any real law enforcement objective behind it. And it's been very difficult to challenge these seizures and challenge this intrusion into our privacy and intrusion into our constitutional rights. Because once they invoke national security, it becomes a different kind of fight. So we're still fighting every day. Our national office is working with us to file lawsuits to help people get off of the watch list, to try to declare the watch list unconstitutional, to try to change the process by which people can get off of it. Because right now there's really no process to get off of it. If you're on it, you file paperwork to say, hey, I think you've made a mistake. And the majority of the time, the paper comes back and says, we may or may not have made a mistake, but the only way you'll know if you're off of the list is if you fly again. And I would say probably in 60% of the time, it doesn't clear up any problems that people had while they were traveling. Something else that's been happening recently that we haven't seen before is people having their electronics seized on their way out of the country. People are now being stopped at the gate as they board an airplane and to travel internationally, and they're having their electronics seized at the border, and then they're having it returned to them upon their reentry into the United States. And that's something that before this year we hadn't seen happening really. So the watch list is really active. It's really incorporating a lot of people. It's really scooping up a lot of people in our community, and it's still a really big problem for Muslims to travel while Muslim. We also have a lot of law enforcement interactions that are unnecessary. We still get calls every week from people who have been visited by the FBI, and they really are not looking for any information. The FBI is knocking on people's doors, calling them, asking them questions about how they feel about overseas politics, how they feel about the sanctions in different places, things that are not really within the purview of the investigation of the FBI. People's political feelings are not really a crime, and they're not really up for investigation. But it's an avenue by which the FBI tries to get in and have a conversation with people so that they can then find out more information and try to gain access to our community. So it's something that's very real and something that's still happening. And I know Brother Dawud talked a little bit about the Joint Terrorism Task Force and CVE, and that sounds like such a big concept, and it sounds like we don't, you can't really see how it touches our lives. But I can guarantee you the JTTF, or the Joint Terrorism Task Force, touches all of our lives. Let me give you for instance. Last year, we filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the city of Detroit regarding their Project Greenlight cameras. And the city of Detroit has a lot of cameras in a lot of different places, and they are very proud of the fact that their cameras are monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and by law enforcement officials. So as part of our investigation into where these cameras are placed to see whether or not they're placed during in and around masajids, we found that there are a significant number of cameras that are placed in and around masjids that can actually see the comings and goings of the people from the masjids. They can see license plates, they can see people mingling outside. So Project Greenlight is scooping up all of this information about what's going on in and around our religious centers inside the city of Detroit. And you might not think that's a bad idea, but then you dig a little deeper and you find out that the city of Detroit still has a very active contract with the FBI for their Joint Terrorism Task Force. And one thing that these videos are used for is to be data mined by the Joint Terrorism Task Force to be shared with the FBI. So now we're having mass surveillance in Detroit that is being specifically targeted at masjids, and then the data about people who are coming and going, how many times a day they're there, can all be accessed and given over to investigations. within the local law enforcement and the federal law enforcement, and that's problematic. There's really no reason for anybody to investigate why somebody is going to a place of worship, or how many times a day they're there, or how many times a week that they're there. But it's something that the city of Detroit was very proud to tell us, that the Joint Terrorism Task Force mines this data and collects this information. They're not even shy about sharing that information with us. And I know Brother Dawud talked about the Department of Homeland Security being developed after 9/11, but I think many people would be surprised to find out that the city of Detroit itself has their very own Department of Homeland Security. Now, the city of Detroit is a municipality. It's a local governmental entity. It doesn't police the state, let alone the federal landscape. So why does the city of Detroit need its own Department of Homeland Security? They have contracts with the government, and clearly it's a moneymaker for them. They get federal funding for it, but what do they have to do for that federal funding? And what has been the focus of the Department of Homeland Security since its inception? It's been targeting Muslims. So we know there's a large population of Muslims who live in and around Detroit, who come into Detroit for events, who are now subject to this intrusive, invasive screening when they come in to the city. And it's problematic, and it's a carryover from the policies that were enacted on a federal level since 9/11. So it's something that I think that we all need to be aware of. It's something that the citizens of Detroit should be aware of for sure, and should be holding the police department and the city accountable for what that information, where that information is going, and what are we doing with it, and to ensure that it's not being used in a manner to further disenfranchise Muslims of their rights. And so that's sort of on a local level what's going on with those federal policies. And if we think that it's just a law enforcement issue, that Muslims are really just being targeted by law enforcement, I can tell you from the work that we do at CAIR-Michigan and the work that we've done over the last few years, those federal policies and those local policies and the way that they're spoken about and the way that they've been enacted has a real effect in other aspects of the law. It has an effect on employment discrimination cases. It has an effect in schools. We've seen where these policies and the propaganda that is reinforced with these type of discriminatory policies has a real effect on the day-to-day lives of Muslims. We had a case just 2 years ago of an employee who went on vacation and came back from vacation to find out that one of his coworkers had placed signs all over his workplace while he was gone, encouraging people to call the FBI on him, accusing him of being a terrorist, accusing him of being in one of two different countries. He could be here or he could be here. We think he might be going to a terrorist camp while he's on vacation, and encouraging people to call the FBI. And in fact, his work did notify the FBI that these notices were placed around, and that people suspected him of being a terrorist. So because he had somebody at his workplace who had a bias, a bigotry against him because of the types of policies and the type of rhetoric we hear coming from the top down, he had a real problem where the FBI was investigating him. He had a hostile working environment. He was here on a special visa from Canada that allowed you to travel back and forth across the Canadian border. And he wasn't able to come to work for a few days until the FBI figured out that the person who put them around was basically lying and causing him a problem. And the person who, caused all these people to call the FBI had no ramifications for what happened. He kept his job. He didn't have any FBI involvement. He just went on with his life like it didn't happen. And this other individual had his life ruined. And we've had more than one case like that. And we had actually several cases of people coming across the Canadian border to work who were stopped from working because they actually they refused to provide information to the FBI about who their contacts were, who they're here and overseas. And then it took them months to be able to get their visa reactivated. And thankfully, some of them were able to keep their jobs, but unfortunately, some employers are not willing to wait 3 months for you to be able to come back to work because you failed to be an informant for the FBI. And this is a case that took place last year. So these policies from the top down are really affecting people at a more personal level than just the law enforcement interactions. We've seen school children who've been charged by different juvenile prosecutors because their school has turned them in for under terroristic threats. And when really all they did was have a breakdown in class and ask a question, are you thinking about hurting yourself or hurting somebody else? And in a cry for help said yes. And then the next thing you know, the police are raiding their house and charging this individual who was under the age of 16 with making terroristic threats at school. And we know that that's because of the rhetoric that's coming out about how Muslims are violent, because that is not something that other children at 14 years of age who've had a mental breakdown at school would, that's a standard question for mental health providers to see whether they're a danger to harming them for self-harm. And instead of, getting him help for his feelings of self-harm, he was taken to jail and charged with a crime. And that happened right here in a school district right outside of Dearborn a couple years ago. And it's very unfortunate. But so what we've seen is this trickle-down effect that Brother Doug was talking about from the policies that started federally in 9/11 and then are carried over to our local governments. And it's really interesting to see that some of these places that are very heavily populated by Muslims, like the city of Dearborn, for instance, where the Muslims are lauded by the city as being, great members of the community, very productive members of society. They're very engaged civically. They're engaged in the school system. They're engaged in politics. And yet the city of Dearborn was one of the last municipalities to to stop taking money from the federal government for CVE. And they took money for CVE just a couple years ago to utilize it in our public school system with our minor children that are majority Muslim children, in an effort to disenfranchise them, or because they're inherently seen as susceptible to being violent because of their religion. So it's kind of, frankly, it's disturbing to see that these Muslim majority cities, or these cities with heavy Muslim populations, are engaging in this type of work. So those are some of the cases that we've dealt with over the last couple of years. I just want to implore people to say that while we think that we are being good citizens because we're helping or we're speaking with law enforcement or we don't have anything to hide, I can tell you that that's generally not a good idea. What we see in our office is people who are engaging and having these conversations with law enforcement are actually perpetrating the idea that there's something wrong with the Muslim community. And then they start to have problems later when they no longer want to cooperate. Now you find yourself on a watch list, or you find yourself having FBI contacts more and more frequently. So if we are cautious about what we're doing and what information that we're willing to share amongst our law enforcement people who are just knocking on our door, then we have a better stance for protecting ourselves and our own community and the United States. Because when there's an erosion of one person's rights, there's an erosion of everybody's rights. So in order to really, really protect and advocate for the rights of all of the citizens of the United States, we must first advocate for our own personal and individual rights. And I think with that, I will turn it back over to Sister Zienab, who's going to talk about some of the policies, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you for going into so much detail and really highlighting, one, all of the amazing work you do, but two, also what you were saying, these policies and these changes are affecting all Muslims. And as you mentioned, it kind of trickles down into the culture and what social norms are. We saw a huge increase, of course, this is no surprise, in anti-Muslim hate crimes or attacks or incidences. CAIR actually reported the year after 9/11 about 2,000 incidences, and a majority of them were harassment or threats or some sorts of hate messages. FBI also reported an increase in 1,600% of anti-Muslim incidents in 2001. And we know that to be in response to 9/11. So even if calculations are for 2001, that means there were probably, that increase happened within just a span of 4 months. So again, there's this huge cultural change of how the general public perceives Muslims, how they want to interact with Muslims, and how they think they're interacting with Muslims and Islam, which sometimes people, can perceive to be mutually exclusive. So the ways in which we're seeing this are, we mentioned school bullying, Sister Amy mentioned. Muslim families actually reported to ISPU in their 2020 report, 50% of American Muslim families had reported that their children faced faith-based discrimination or bullying or some type of issues at school. And this is double the amount of what normal families report. So we know that Muslim students specifically at school are being affected and targeted. And if we look into statistics even further, we see that of those complaints from Muslim students, 30% of them are happening between students and teachers or even school officials. So we're seeing two major issues, student-to-student bullying and student to maybe teachers or an official. And this will actually kind of get us into the next discussion, which what is CAIR-Michigan really doing to address these issues? So for example, Safe Spaces and CAIR-Michigan really values partnerships with schools because one, we're aware of what happens to Muslim students, and we want to make sure that we can educate not only those students, but the broader school, proper education pertaining to Muslims and Islam, how to properly accommodate Muslim students, whether it's fasting, whether it's, Ramadan, praying during school, things of that nature. But all of that is really a source of trying to help correct this culture of, unfortunately, increasing anti-Muslim bigotry, especially on the school level. So we, try to work on that and the student-to-student relationship, but then also even the issues that we see with students and school officials or teachers, or maybe students feeling uncomfortable with curriculum that's offered. CAIR-Michigan, works on those partnerships with the school and hopefully has a partnership even beforehand. So, we're not really reacting to an incident, but we're just, reaching out and being as proactive as possible. But, working with schools to check what textbooks are being offered. Is there anti-Muslim sentiment, underlying some of the books that are being read in literature classes? What are textbooks saying? How can we properly talk about 9/11 in classrooms without singling out Muslim students or making them feel uncomfortable? How do we react to cases of bullying that have to do with Muslim students? How do we make sure that those cases of bullying or these issues that come up are properly being treated? So those are a number of ways I think especially my department is looking into really tackling this issue because, again, people can say 9/11 happened 20 years ago. Oh, it was so long ago. But again, we're still seeing the effects because incidents like that, and unfortunately being tied to the American Muslim community, affect culture and affect social norms and play into implicit biases of a lot of people who may or may not have never even met a Muslim before. So I think I touched a bit on what Safe Spaces is working on, and especially within schools. Like I said, we see employment discrimination cases, maybe working with governmental entities, departments, officials, police departments, etc. But Amy, if you could share with us sort of, if you can, from what you already broadly talked about in terms of what cases our office receives, what services do we actually provide maybe how can somebody reach out if they're concerned or have an issue?
Sure. So our office actually offers a broad range of legal services. When you talk about law enforcement interactions, we actually represent people who've had FBI contacts. So if somebody calls our office or emails or does an intake online from our website and says, "Hey, I've had a FBI agent, for instance, show up at my door and knock on my door and want to ask me questions about my travel overseas or how I feel about the sanctions in Iran," or most recently, we want to make sure the Afghan refugees are safe when they come over here. So we'd like you to let us know where they are so we can contact them. If they contact us and say that, we actually do law enforcement representation. So we'll take all of the information from the individual who was contacted. We'll have a meeting with them, and then we will notify the FBI that if they want to communicate any further, we will be the point of contact for them. And we've done that. Since we've had an attorney on staff, it's my understanding that that's been the policy of CAIR-Michigan to represent, and it's at no charge. We never charge people for our services, so it's a little bit it's a better deal, I guess you could say, than trying to hire a private criminal attorney. We have experience. We know specifically about the types of information the FBI is looking for and how to handle that specific issue. So you can call our office. We have an online intake form. You can email us, and we handle that. We also do, we file the paperwork for people who have travel issues to file a redress application so that we can CBP override to try to see if we can relieve some of the difficulties that they have when traveling either domestically or internationally. We file no less than 2 of those a week usually because there is such a problem here. So somebody can call our office and say, "Hey, I've had a difficult time traveling. It's been one time, it's been 10 times, it's been the last 5 years." And we will do that paperwork for them. And then if they continue to have problems, we refer them out to our national office for watch list litigation. Lena Massery, who was the attorney at CAIR-Michigan before me, she moved up to CAIR National. She's a litigation director. So she's been doing watch list litigations, as Brother Dawud said, since the initial one was filed in the Eastern District of Michigan. So we let the experts in that handle that, and we follow the case along and we assist and with the client and with that litigation as much as possible to see if we can relieve the problems. We do a whole range of litigation involving all types of discrimination that faces Muslims. We have we're actively litigating against law enforcement agencies right now regarding Muslim women who've had their hijab removed forcefully for a mugshot. We are litigating employment discrimination cases in the federal court. At this time, we work through the administration agencies. And so we're doing all of those employment cases. We've represented students in the administrative offices, Michigan Department of Civil Rights, who've been bullied, and the school maybe didn't remedy the bullying appropriately or effectively, so they have a continuing issue and the school is just not taking care of it. As Brother Dawud said, zoning is a big issue still for Muslims. We think that we live in this society where everybody has their rights, and we have the right to our freedom of religion, the right to assemble, the right to practice our religion in the public spaces, but we are still having issues with zoning. And we have open litigation right now against the city of Troy, who still will not let a masjid form in the city of Troy, despite having over 3,000 Muslims, at least in the city of Troy, at a minimum of 3,000 Muslims in the city of Troy. Yet they have no place of worship in the city of Troy for Muslims. And we're actively representing people and communities in Sterling Heights still, and we go in front of the ZBA and we go in front of the Planning Commission, and there are still people showing up to these commissions to fight against the Muslims having a space in the city, saying some of the most absurd and Islamophobic things I've ever heard. We had somebody say that Muslims drive around with a speaker on their car calling the adhan at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's why they didn't want a masjid there. It's like literally one of the most absurd things but it's true. And they use these tropes as a way to try to dissuade the whatever governmental body we're in front of from allowing Muslims to have a space. So we do, if you have a community that you're trying to get a center in and you're having a hard time with the city, we represent, communities in zoning. We represent individuals who've been discriminated against, either at work, sometimes in public. We've had cases against establishments, including Wendy's, including Tim Hortons, where people have been denied public service, Greyhound for being denied public service, in places of public accommodation in violation of state and federal law. And we do litigation, and we're happy to do it, and we don't charge people for our services. So if you think that money is a barrier to obtaining services for a legal issue that you're having that arises from discrimination, you can rest assured that at CAIR Michigan, money is not going to keep you from getting the services that you need. And it's my understanding as well from talking with Sister Zienab that if you come to safe spaces with an issue, maybe you have a problem at a school or you've had a problem at your job that regarding getting an accommodation at your workplace, which I know Sister Zienab has dealt with a couple times this year already, somebody who wasn't properly accommodated during Ramadan. She will work to advocate for you to be able to get those accommodations, and safe spaces doesn't charge people for the work that they do either. So I think that's a broad brush at kind of what we do, and we take cases as they come. We do electronic seizures, so we file letters demanding to get devices back. We did a passport issue where a brother there's a lot of problems with passports and Yemeni people. Like, they're very difficult for Yemeni people to sometimes obtain their passport, even if they've been a citizen for 15 or 20 years. We're finding that it's difficult for them to obtain a renewal of their passport. So we've just this year had to do one where somebody was waiting over a year and a half for a passport to be able to travel back home and visit their family back home in Yemen. They just went and issued the passport, and we, were forced, unfortunately, to send a letter to the Attorney General's office saying, hey, either issue this passport or we're going to take you to court. And alhamdulillah, his passport was issued within a couple weeks of that letter being received. But it's so we take a variety of cases, and if you have a novel case and something happens to you, we're more than happy to look at it to see if there's something that we can do for you.
Thank you. That was a great overview of really all the services we offer, or at least most of them. We may have missed some, who knows. But all that to say, I mean, discrimination is it looks different in a lot of ways. So that's why Amy really had a whole list, Sister Amy. And I encourage everyone to please report incidences if they happen to you, if they happen to a loved one. You're helping yourself, and you're helping the Muslim community, and you're helping whatever space the incident happened in, giving them the opportunity to learn and grow and change. Inshallah, these numbers can go down, and we see less and less of these anti-Muslim incidents of bias. So, Brother Dawud, if you can close us off, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Zienab and Sister Amy. And I'm really thankful to Allah, to Almighty God, to have very capable and very intelligent colleagues that I work with that are very hardworking, and definitely for sure that both of you, if you were to leave CAIR Michigan and go work in the private sector, you would make way more money than what you're making right now. So may Allah reward you, may Allah protect your families, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make all the work that you're doing heavy on your mizan hasanat on the day of judgment. So I'm going to wrap things up and just talk more about, more so some suggestions for our community. And I mentioned today in Khutbah al-Jummah at Iona Masjid that as a community, when we first experienced 9/11 and the amount of pressure that many of our community members were facing was something new that we hadn't experienced. And like any new endeavor, sometimes we stagger a little bit. We trip and fall and get back up. But we as Muslims, we are about the business of ihsan, about spiritual beauty and about improving what we do. And it's not to condemn what we've done as a community, but part of the philosophy behind Tawbah is not just repenting from sins or things that were done wrong intentionally, but it's also about recognizing where we come short and try to improve and excel in our turning towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is to strive to do better for his pleasure and for the benefit of humankind. So with that, my brothers and sisters in Islam, and we still have this phenomenon in our community, and I've been very vocal about this. Is in the Detroit Free Press story yesterday. I have an op-ed today. It's in the Detroit News. You can check out. I was talking about this today in the khutbah, and I've been saying it for a number of years. I actually got inspired by the late Sharif Bassiuni. May Allah have mercy on his soul. He's a Egyptian American human rights attorney who actually did some work regarding the genocide and investigation in Bosnia. And I was actually deployed off the Adriatic Sea right after the genocide of Bosnian Muslims back in 1995 when I was in the U.S. Navy. But I remember at the first CAIR-Michigan banquet in which I was executive director, he was the keynote speaker. It was at the Islamic Center of America in Dearborn, America's largest masjid. And he spoke and he ended the speech and he said, "For God's sake, stop apologizing." And then he basically dropped the mic. For God's sake, stop apologizing. So what I would say to my Muslim brothers and sisters, those of you who are activists, those of you who are in academia and parent-teacher clubs, just in your gatherings with your children, please stop apologizing about things that our community is not responsible for. There's no such thing as collective guilt legally, but more importantly, there's no such thing as collective guilt socially in society, and we can't play into that. When we start apologizing for things that our community is not responsible for, we end up reinforcing a framework that we have some sort of culpability or we have some sort of responsibility. And no matter how much we keep apologizing, we can never apologize enough. Now, I would say that the addendum that I have this, or the addition of this, is that this apology or these apologies aren't just trying to apologize to curry favor or to be accepted by the dominant culture in terms of those who identify as conservatives. This apologetic tone also relates to those who call themselves progressives or so-called liberals. It goes for both sides of the fence, right? So we as a community, if we are going to not only exercise our civic responsibilities, but to secure our rights, then we have to be able to stand up not just for Muslims as a faith identity, but also for our faith in general. And that might mean that we are in conflict sometimes with people on the left, though we think that they are our allies. And I'll give an example with this situation that took place in Texas with this legislation as it relates to abortion. You had, if you just go on Twitter, you saw people who were hashtagging vanilla ISIS. You had people who were hashtagging Christian Sharia. These are people on the left, including people who work for some of these so-called woke organizations and people who are activists who are hashtagging this. In this type of framework, they are saying, right, that they believe, or at least are implying, that that the Sharia or the sacred law is bad. It disenfranchises women, right? And in saying vanilla ISIS, even though it's mentioning vanilla meaning white folks, which I don't believe in trying to paint all white people with a broad brush. And by the way, in southeastern Michigan, a significant percentage of our community are white Muslims, not converts. Majority are Muslims who've been Muslims for centuries, who immigrated from Bosnia and Albania. I was just in Bosnia about a month ago. People who are Europeans, who are white, who've been Muslims for centuries, right? But when people say vanilla ISIS, it is pegging or making the epitome of what extremism is or what terrorism is as Muslim. And it's not just people on the right that do it. They're doing on the left. Is going on right now with the talk about Afghanistan, right? And so you know, we, as much as we have to be against Islamophobia, we also have to stand up and be courageous and unapologetic about challenging imanophobia. Now I'm using this term. CAIR, there's not an official term that's normally used in activist circles, but Islamophobia, for the most part, basically is a type of racism of treating Muslims like a non-white group. That's how many people use the term Islamophobia, right? But imanophobia is being hostile towards our actual beliefs, because iman means faith, right? It's being hostile towards our actual faith virtues. And we have people who say that they are in solidarity with Muslims, and at the same time, they spread Orientalist tropes and revile or at least denigrate our sacred terminology and our terms, right? And they will even do this in the framework of diversity and inclusion. But if we're really about inclusion, then your inclusion can't mean the exclusion of what's sacred to me, right? If we live in a truly liberal society, okay, you're able to practice or believe what you want to believe, but it can't be to the exclusion of my ability to be able to freely participate and exercise my constitutional rights in a civil society, right? So this is going to be a growing challenge for us as a Muslim community, right? And I'm just saying, we don't give bay'ah to the right like there are political caliphate like Republicans or people on the right, and likewise, so-called progressives and the Democrat Party on the left don't deserve our bay'ah. They're not Amir al-Mu'mineen. They're not the progressive caliphate, right? So that's my sincere advice. We're going to be challenged more, and we are an organization that's about protecting not only our our civil rights from bullying, being harassed by government, but we are also about the business of protecting civil liberties, right? Which includes freedom of religious practice. And that's not just for us, it's for everyone. If a Catholic's religious rights or a Mormon's religious rights are going to be infringed upon, that puts our religious rights as Muslims in jeopardy. And we do have some friends in the broader society, including the Catholic community, who see the same thing with us. And that's why years ago, when there was a push to pass anti-Sharia legislation in the state of Michigan, we had partners in the Catholic community and in the Jewish community that stood by us. And you can go to CAIR Michigan's website and see a briefing that we gave years ago to state legislators, in which we had a Islamic scholar speak about Sharia and the Islamic sacred law. We had a rabbi from Ann Arbor who spoke about Judaic sacred law. And we had a Catholic scholar who spoke about sacred Catholic canon law, right? And we talked about how if that legislation passed in Michigan, it would have not only affected Muslims negatively, it could have affected also Jews, Catholics, Mormons, and others in a negative light, right? So that's my two things. And then the last point that I will make is this, is that despite the challenges that we've had in the United States of America, alhamdulillah, praise God that our community has not suffered the amount of homicides that other communities have, that the Black Christian community has had, like in South Carolina and other congregations being attacked by white supremacists, or the Sikh community in the Oak Creek Gurdwara. We've had a few incidences, such as the 3 Palestinian Americans who were murdered years ago in Chapel Hill. We've had an issue of an Afghan woman who's been killed. But in the last 20 years, this has been a very minuscule number of American Muslims in comparison to other faith groups. The Jewish community and the attack that took place in Pittsburgh. Praise God, we haven't had those types of homicides, and we ask Almighty God to continue to protect our community and protect our Jewish, Christian, and Sikh brothers and sisters and fellow Americans, brothers and sisters in humanity, because there's only 2 types of people: your brother and sister in faith, or your brother and sister in humankind, right? So we're all children of Adam, according to Islamic theology, right? So, but my point that I'm getting to in the third part is that we as Muslims have a job to educate the broader community about our beliefs. And instead, and as 20 years have passed, as some of us have been seeking acceptance from the broader society, it's time to flip that around, turn that around, and to educate the broader society truly, in a truly unapologetic way, people on the right and the left, what Islam stands for, what our values are, and invite them to learn about and to even accept what we believe, instead of us seeking to be accepted by other people, right? This should be the job of the community moving forward in the next 20 years, in my estimation. And I also talked about this in today's sermon. Now, we have some programs that are coming up, and I want to share the next one that's coming up, which is very important for us to be plugged into. It's going to be in Canton community. I'm sharing right here. So we're having a Know Your Rights at School presentation, and we do this every year, sometimes more than once a year. And we know that this year students are back in person. So we want to tell students, along with their parents, about their rights, about how to handle certain situations in schools, right? In terms of accommodations in Ramadan, for instance, Friday accommodations, Eid accommodations. What happens if a teacher puts into the class a book that is anti-Muslim or Islamophobic in nature, what to do, or if something is said during lessons that's being taught that's clearly un-Islamic, or if administrators, coaches, or teachers are involved in bullying, because it's not just students are involved in anti-Muslim bullying. There are teachers that are involved in it as well. Like what to do, what are your rights, what is your recourse? Also, and very specific to Plymouth Canton District, we want to tell you about your rights and responsibilities, give you some tips in regards to how to navigate the new issue that's popped up in Plymouth Canton School District in terms of their instituting a new policy about gender self-selection for the bathrooms and the locker rooms. So how is it, on the one hand, you can respect an individual's right to self-identify, but on the other hand, preserve your rights, right? For instance, sisters who want to go into a bathroom and take off their scarf and to adjust it, or to make wudu during lunch break, or after school on Fridays for the Jummah prayer in school, for instance, right? Now, we know, according to the consensus of all schools of thought, that a sister can't take off her headscarf and make wudu in front of someone of the opposite gender. And whether someone self-selects being a female when they're a male, our fuqaha, our scholars across the board, don't accept that as being jaiz or being permissible. How should that be navigated? Is there any recourse? right? And again, we've heard this concern from some community members and some parents. So people have their rights to be included, but their inclusion cannot be your exclusion. So how can we navigate this in a respectful way, respecting other people's right to choose, respecting people's basic humanity, while at the same time preserving our religious rights of our children, of our daughters in particular? How do we navigate that? We're going to go through that. I know it's a little, and that's a little spicy topic right there, right? But I mean, you know, we deal with the hot issues at CAIR-Michigan. We've always have. We've never shied away from it, be it the FBI and informants and agent provocateurs, or former Congressman Peter King having a neo-McCarthy witch hunt against the Muslim community and CAIR in particular. And I was mentioned, by the way, in one of those witch hunt trials in Congress. Or if it's dealing with issues such as navigating the issue of trans issues, right? Like, how do we navigate that? CAIR-Michigan, we're here to serve the community in a respectful manner, under the framework of our faith values, and also within the framework of working within the Constitution of these United States of America. So with that, my brothers and sisters, if you have any questions, you can pose them for our viewers. I was sharing a comment from one of our beloved sisters, actually, who is a board member with MANA, the Muslim Alliance in North America. She's based in Kentucky. Sister Wahida, the wife of Dr. Issam Bagby. So thank you for the comment, Sister Wahida, and also all of the khidmah and all the work that I know you're doing out there in Kentucky and with the Share Center, helping those individuals in the community who are poor and impoverished, helping returning citizens who are leaving incarceration, getting back into society, and also helping people in regards to their religious rights. We're thankful to Allah for you and for your comment. And last, and I would be remiss not to do this. So look, let's keep it 100. Let's keep it real. Sister Amy mentioned that our services, that we don't charge people for services. That's true. We don't charge people. Anyone can come in, no matter what national origin, background, gender, race, even religion. We've helped people with cases who aren't Muslims. We got an accommodation last year for religious diet for a Jewish American in Macomb County Jail, right? We've gotten accommodations for Jews, Jewish Americans. We've helped Christians file complaints with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights on behalf of Christians, right? If someone comes to our office and from the LGBTQ community and they've been discriminated against because they're Muslim, right? We're going to help them, and we've helped people within that subsection, right? So we don't charge. However, we have a budget, and the majority of our budget comes from the generous sadaqah and zakat that is given by people in the community. Sadaqah is general. Zakat is very specific. We have marked certain people who come to us, constituents who are indigent, and we have money set aside that if they need certain assistance regarding filings or things such as that, that we have some money set aside, and we have it marked for those who would be zakat eligible. Because many people who come to CAIR-Michigan's office, They come in financial crisis. Example, if someone comes to us, sister converts to Islam. She got the job. She was a Christian. She became Muslim, decides to put on her hijab. Her employer tells her, take that thing off your head or you're going to get fired. She keeps it on and gets fired from her job. Many Americans are 2 paychecks away from being homeless, right? That's a reality. So people come to us in dire financial straits at time and we help them, right? So freedom is not free. There's a price to pay, right? You want an organization's professional that stands up for your rights, that advocates for you, then we all have to chip in and do our part. And we have to get out of the mindset, and I've been saying this in the last couple of years, that people expect Islamic organizations that when they do things, it's fi sabilillah. And it is true, it's in the path of God. But fi sabilillah is not free sabilillah, meaning that we all have to pay our part if we're able to pay sadaqah to help our Islamic institutions roll and to do what we need to do. And I said that, you know, of the people who went out and did da'wah and went out and did tasks on behalf of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, people act like he sent Mu'adh bin Jabal to Yemen to do da'wah and do khidmah and sent him with empty pockets. Like he had lint in his thobe pockets, so to speak, you know, but he's supposed to have been doing X, Y, and Z. So look, it's Jummah Day. It's the best day of giving charity. We have a few moments left. I'm inviting you today to give CAIR-Michigan a donation today, secure, or you can mail in a check or money order. You make the niyyah now. Yom al-Jum'ah is the best day of the week of giving sadaqah. So I invite you to do that. And with that, we will close. Come to our Know Your Rights presentation this upcoming Tuesday, 7 p.m. at the Medina Activity Center in Canton, Michigan. And with that, I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I ask God to heal those with heavy hearts who lost family members on 9/11 or abroad. I ask Almighty Allah to give those families healing. I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give healing and comfort to all of those who've suffered racism and anti-Muslim bigotry in the last 20 years since 9/11. I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us be of people who actually are being constructive and calling people towards justice and fairness in our society, and not being people who are divisive and dividing people based upon race, class, and religion. I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us be steadfast in faith, to be unapologetically Muslim with the right and the left when they go against our civil rights or disrespect our sacred tradition. I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lift this wabah, this COVID-19 pandemic, the Delta variant, now the Mu variant. I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lift this pandemic from the earth. I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give shifa, to give healing to all of those who are watching, to give healing to all of your loved ones, no matter what malady they are suffering, be it physical or spiritual malady. We ask Almighty Allah to grant us shifa min kulli da, to give us healing from all maladies, all sicknesses. And I ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless and protect all of the board members of CAIR-Michigan, to bless my colleagues at CAIR-Michigan, to bless them, to bless their families, to protect them and their loved ones from harm. Al-Fatiha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.